Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Comics Lair for our discussion of the bright days and dark nights of the Lantern Corps. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott, and I'll start by asking our panel to introduce themselves and briefly describe kind of what stage of the lanterns, green or multi-hued or whatever, the group was in when they discovered it and what drew them to it. Fraser, you want to start?
Yes, I'm Fraser Sherman, write historical fantasy and film reference books. I started reading comic books when I was a kid in the 60s, so I was introduced to classic Silver Age, John Broome, Green Lantern Corps. And I liked Green Lantern. The Corps just made it that much more interesting. All these strange, colorful aliens and all part of the same big crime-fighting team. And I remained a fan for a long time after.
Okay, John?
Okay, my name is John L. French. I'm a retired crime scene investigator from the Baltimore City Police Department. Now I write crime, fantasy, horror, paranormal investigation, basically whatever people ask me to write. And my first exposure to to Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, was, I believe it was a Brave and Bold comic, which had Barry Allen being beamed up into a spaceship and Hal Jordan trying to save him, but the beam was yellow and Hal couldn't do anything about that. And it was a good comic, and that was my exposure. And of course, Hal would show up in the Justice League books. I was not a regular follower of Green Lantern at that point, but if the cover of the comic looked good, I would pick it up.
Chris?
I'm Chris Cavett, not an author, just a fan. I discovered Green Lantern in the early to mid 70s when he was in Justice League. It had been relegated to backup stories in The Flash. It was a period I refer to as the Dark Ages, about 4 years between Green Lantern number 89 and Green Lantern number 90. But I was able to find back issues at a local flea market of the Silver Age series from the 60s, the comics Fraser loved, and I love those comics too.
Well, those of you who are regulars here know that I write historical fiction for Falstaff Books and publish several different kinds of romance and science fiction. My introduction to Green Lantern was in an issue of the Justice League. I don't remember which one, back in the Silver Age. And one of the things I liked about Hal/Green Lantern was the variety of constructs he could do with the ring. Giant hammers, giant hands, pincers, whatever you needed, Hal could make it green as long as nothing yellow got in his way. And I liked that, and I liked that he was a team player, because I tend to like superhero teams just in general. But what really got me into the character was when a friend introduced me to the Green Lantern, Green Arrow series in the early 1970s. And the story and the art, to me, were just mind-blowing. And I thought Hal's character was more developed than he had been in other stories I'd seen, which is not surprising when you think that Denny O'Neil wrote those stories. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, yes or no? Should they have added all the multiple colors of lanterns to the Corps, or should they have stuck with tried and true green and played with that more? John, what do you think?
No, I thought that they sort of all right, first of all, let's be honest. There was Sinestro with his yellow ring, but he was not yet a Corps. And then there was the Star Sapphires, who again were more of an alien planet, an alien race, even, despite the woman they picked to lead them. And they weren't really organized enough. I thought that the introduction of the primary color Lantern Corps just made a mess of things. And I don't really think it was done all that well, particularly, what was his name? Larfries, or, the Orange Lantern.
The orange.
I think once that started, it was, several years of, despite the artists and the writers, several years of the Green Lantern Corps, et cetera, that I just didn't want to follow.
Okay, Chris?
I think ultimately I come down on no as well. I was happy that we were getting a Green Lantern book every week during that period. There was the Sinestro Corps series and the Red Lantern Corps series, and two different Green Lantern titles. And I loved that. I could never have imagined when I was a kid having to settle for backup stories in the Flash that someday there would be a Lantern book every week. And I tried to enjoy them, but I think ultimately it made the Green Lantern seem less special if there were all these other corps with all these other colors. I think it would have maybe been a nice Elseworld story or something, but I'd prefer not to have it in real continuity.
Fraser?
Okay, first off, a technical note. John, the story you remember reading was Captives of the Cosmic Ray. It's a Flash story with GL guest starring around 130. Now, in answer to the main question, I liked the Corps when they were introduced. It was intriguing. It was creative. Looking back, in hindsight, the best Corps were like Sinestro and his yellow ring, which is expanding on a pre-existing concept. The Star Sapphires, again, expanding on a pre-existing concept. They were never really able to make it as good as it might have been. And part of that is, I think, Jeff Johns wrote Green Lantern for a long time after he was doing good work on Green Lantern. I like a lot of his work on other stuff, but not so much the GL stuff.
Well, for me, it's kind of confusing to say that each of these colors represents an emotional trait, and that's what fuels the Lantern's power. Because in some ways, it seems very restrictive for each color. Like, I have to look at the list because I can't keep them straight. There are too many of them, said the woman who loves the Legion of Superheroes and keeps all of them straight. But I can't keep these straight. Indigo for compassion. How are you going to stop a fight with compassion? How are you going to make a construct that will stop a fight with compassion? I thought the Black Lanterns and the black rings were an interesting concept, but for me, the whole rainbow was kind of a bridge too far. And I think that's in part because when I was growing up and reading Green Lantern, and I tend to like what I liked first, that tends to remain my favorite. I liked the idea that they were all out there in interstellar police force, and they had this commonality running through it in that willpower was the primary component for their abilities. And I haven't read a lot of the Rainbow Lanterns, but it just doesn't call to me. And I don't really know why. It just feels a little mixed up somehow. And, other people's mileage may vary. I'm sure there are people watching this who go, "What do you mean you all don't like that?" And that's fine, to each their own, but that happens to be where the panel shakes out. So there are all these lanterns now wearing all these different colors. Who's your favorite lantern and why? And you can have more than one. Chris, do you want to start?
For me, it's Hal Jordan. I think it goes back to what you said is true of you. I think it's true of many of us in comic fandom that we tend to like the characters that we embraced as children when we were first reading comics and probably the most excited about them. So I liked that he was a test pilot and that the focus was on space and science. He was really of his time for the space age. And I thought he had a wonderful supporting cast. Thomas Kalmuku, I love that Green Lantern shared his identity with him. It was such a common trope that the friend or the girlfriend or the family member, and if I could only tell them, but in doing so would endanger them. And I always think, well, tell someone, they can help you, they can cover for you when you have to leave. And Hal Jordan did that when that wasn't common. And I thought Carol Ferris was a strong character. There was a little bit of that same trope, like with Lois Lane, like, she's in love with Green Lantern and Hal Jordan wants her to like her for him. But she was running an aircraft company. And I thought that was impressive, especially in the 1960s. So
a little ahead of its time, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Fraser, what about you?
I think I would have to go with Hal Jordan again. He did have a great supporting cast, though I've been rereading the Silver Age over the past few years, and I just got up to 66 when he blows off Coast City and goes off. So we lose Tom and we lose Carol, and that was a disappointment. But yes, I think Hal is, depending how he's written, because 50 plus years, he has been changed a lot. He is probably my favorite. I also like John. I like Kyle. I can like Guy in small doses. Of the Alien GLs, I'm fond of Tomari simply because he's been around the longest. I like classic Silver Age Sinestro because none of this I'm going to impose order, I'm a better Green Lantern. He's just straight up someone who got an incredible amount of power, got completely corrupt, and then decided, screw it, you don't like it the way I do it? I will turn evil. I will make you all pay. And that is, in a sense, a very realistic reaction that a lot of people have when they are elevated to power. And he was one of my favorite villains of that era.
John?
Okay. I'm not a big Hal Jordan fan. He can be a bit of a jerk, which is the mild term I use because this is you. But he's self-absorbed. He knows better than anybody else. And if you saw the first issue of the current Green Lantern comic, and there's only been one issue, he does an enormous amount of damage just to prove that he can be right. He's a womanizer. And let's not forget what happened with Arista. I don't care what she looked like; she was still a 14. But
I'm sorry, John. We lost the last bit of that last sentence.
I'm sorry. Let us not forget Arista. I don't care what she turned herself into and what she looked like. She was still a 14-year-old girl. My favorites. Well, Guy Gardner's not one of my favorites, but I'll never not like Guy because he's from Baltimore. But my favorite Green Lantern is Alan Scott, but he's not member of the Green Lantern Corps, so he's out of the discussion. I like John Stewart. I think of all the Green Lanterns, at least the Earth Green Lanterns, he's probably the most competent. He made a great mistake, and he has learned from that mistake. He is in military, so he knows what it's like to be a leader. And let us not forget that one or two times he has been elevated to the status of near guardian. I also like Kyle was good, and I do miss Jack Chance.
Well, let's call Alan Scott an honorary member of the Green Lantern Corps.
Okay.
And you can tell us, why don't you tell us what you like about him so much?
Well, first of all, I was used to the Hal Jordan Green Lantern. And every once in a while, this guy from Earth 2 would show up, and he was a Green Lantern, but he was kind of a different kind of guy. No pun intended. And he just kept getting better. When he discovered he had a family, he sort of sought out and embraced that family. He became a rarity in the DC Comics, which was a good father. And I think the way they have presented Alan Scott now, with his realization that he is gay, was wonderfully done. And he still stayed Alan Scott, still stays true to what he believes. Although his ring can't affect wood was kind of a dumb weakness, but we'll have to let that slide. But no, Alan Scott is my favorite Green Lantern.
May I add one more I forgot to mention?
Sure.
Katma-Tui, the alien Green Lantern of Korogar, she replaced Sinister on his world, eventually became part of the Earth-based Green Lantern Corps. She was cool. She was one of a small number of female Green Lanterns. She was unfortunately fridged while Jim Owsley was writing the series, and that sucked.
Didn't she have a storyline where she couldn't decide whether she should leave the Green Lantern Corps to get married, and then she decided...
That was her introduction. She is torn between love and duty, and of course this was the 1960s, so working and getting married wasn't an option, even on Korogar, apparently. So Hal convinced her that her first duty was her duty to the Corps. She felt stronger than she did love. Eventually, she fell in love with John Stewart and married him, and realized that what she had felt for the first guy, it wasn't love in the same sense.
That sounds sort of like a way to fudge it, to say, well, we didn't really say you can't be in love and be Green Lantern. She wasn't really in love with him, kind of to retcon that just a little bit. But I haven't read the story, so that's just my sense from what you're saying.
DC,
that is a pretty accurate sense.
DC has a tendency to have people fall in love and then figure a way to separate them. So I think Hawkman and Hawkwoman, well, she was Hawkgirl back then, had a rather stable relationship, as did the Flashes with their wives, and the Elongated Man and his wife.
Yeah. And let's not even go near what they did to her.
Yeah.
For a long time, my favorite Green Lantern was Hal, but I liked the way John Stewart became like the second Green Lantern of Earth, when every space sector is really only supposed to have one, according to the original rules. But I liked John. I liked his personality. I liked the way he was written. And I liked Ron Vidar because he helped the Legion of Superheroes beat Universo before he became a Green Lantern. And I always liked his character. But my favorite Green Lantern is Jessica Cruz. And that's partly because I read her origin story and I thought, wow. And then I read the first stories where the ring is kind of pushing her to get out and do something. And it picked her. She must have what it takes. The ring picked her. But she was struggling with being able to do that because of depression and I think survivor guilt because of something that had happened to a friend of hers. And then I read Justice League Odyssey. And while there are many things to not especially love about that book, there were some things that were really good. And one of them was Jessica Cruz's storyline. And so it really was an example of a character finally totally fully coming into her own after a very, very rough start. I mean, she went toe-to-toe with Darkseid in those books.
Have you seen the animated film Return of the Fatal Five?
I have not.
Well, first, it's got the Fatal Five and at least one Legionnaire, but it's focused on Jessica Cruz. And as you say, she's got survivor guilt. She's not sure she wants to be a Green Lantern. And then at the climax, when Diane Guerrero, who plays Crazy Jane on Doom Patrol, is voicing her, And at the climax, when she has to find the mantra that will give her confidence, she starts saying the oath, and Guerrero totally sells it. Like, I can really feel it, and even though I've read it on the print hundreds of times, it totally works. It's worth, if you're a fan of Jessica Cruz, it is well worth finding.
Oh, okay, thank you. Because I looked at it with my little Legion fan bias and went, the Fatal Five are Legion villains. What are they doing using them here? And so I decided to be in a snit and not watch it. So now I guess I have to watch it. Chris, did I come to you for your favorite Green Lanterns?
You did.
Okay. All right. Anybody want to add anything?
Thanks. I just say I chose Hal Jordan, but I quite like Jessica Cruz as well. Of all the more recent Green Lanterns, she's my favorite. I love that Green Lanterns plural series that she was in. I was disappointed when they canceled that, I think to make room for Grant Morrison's take on Hal Jordan, which was typical Grant Morrison, equal parts brilliant and incomprehensible.
Yep. One of the great things about, I am not a fan of the tendency to just give every superhero these days 3 or 4 similar counterparts as kind of a team/family, but with Green Lanterns, it's baked into the basic concept, so I don't have a problem with it. That is part of what makes them cool. He is part of a whole organization.
Well, yeah, go ahead, John.
The comic book Green Lanterns with Jessica Cruz and I'm blanking on her partner's name, again shows how big a butthead Hal Jordan is, because he shows up and says, you two are the Green Lanterns of Earth, but I'm only going to give you 1 lantern, so you have to cooperate. Never in the history of the Green Lantern Corps has a Green Lantern had to share their lantern. No, but Hal takes it upon himself to do that.
Wasn't her partner Simon Baz or Boz?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those books. Everybody's nodding. Did everybody read those books?
I read most of them. The thing I liked about Simon was first of all, he carried a gun, because what if the ring loses power? I'm going to need a backup. And I think, was he a police officer or something? But anyway, and his journey, aided by Batman, to give up the gun was fascinating. To stop even the psychological dependence on having a backup and just relying on himself and his willpower and his partner.
Well, one of the things I liked about that origin story for Jessica, which was an issue of, I think it was New 52 Justice League, was it was Batman who stepped up and helped her find her center and her composure when she was freaking out over what this piece of jewelry from out of nowhere had done to her life. And I like too that, like you were saying, that it shows a side of Batman that gets pushed aside and buried a lot in favor of the Dark Avenger. Anybody else want to add anything about that maxi series? I guess it was a series. It was a run. It wasn't just 5 or 6.
It ran for a pretty good time.
Yeah. I really liked those. I liked them enough that I bought the trades, and I very rarely do that. What about, of course, blanking on the name of the series, the 12-issue maxi series with Joe Mullane? Out in space, out at the far reaches of the galaxy, and she didn't have a lantern.
Far Sector?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, that, yeah, right. Where she had a ring, but it was I think it's self-charging, and the more she used it, she used it too much, it would basically go dead until it could charge itself up again. I think she was her own battery or something. I read it, and it was in addition to being, she's a great Lantern, and it was also a good crime story.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to add anything?
I haven't read it, though it's on my list.
I did read it, and I thought it was interesting because it was a different take on the lanterns, in part because of the way the ring works, and in part because she was way away from everywhere. There wasn't this, well, I'm just going to call a bunch of other lanterns to help me with this weird problem. And the world building in that series was different from what I had seen before in a Green Lantern series, and I liked the character. And having grown up in an era where there were very few women headlining superhero books, I always check them out when there is one, because, I remember when, oh, wow, here's Wonder Woman, and, oh, Wonder Woman. And I love Wonder Woman, but it's nice to have a variety out there.
May I add a Green Lantern series that I'm still waiting for the third volume of, is Green Lantern Earth 1.
Tell us about it, please.
All right. It is, DC was putting out a series of books, which were sort of like the Marvel Ultimate books. Same concept, but a different take. They did Superman Earth 1, 3 volumes. They did Batman Earth 1, Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman. They did 2 Teen Titans. I wasn't a big fan of there, and they've done 2 Green Lantern. Hal Jordan, but he's sort of working for what's the Ferris, but as mining asteroids. Sure. And they find the ship, and there's the ring, and he want, and it's a completely different. Hal Jordan is probably the best Hal Jordan I read in a long time. But and they're definitely worth looking for. They are graphic novels. They're a little pricey, but when you figure they could have been a 12-issue miniseries, you get value for your money. And I would search the Batman, the Superman, the Wonder Woman out, and the Green Lantern. And I'm still waiting for the third Green Lantern, but I think it's done by J. Michael Straczynski, which explains the delay.
Well, that's a nice segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is what are your favorite story arcs or series with Green Lantern? John, do you want to add anything to what you just said?
Well, I can go on with my favorite Green Lantern series.
Sure, go ahead.
Without a doubt, Mosaic, where some crazy guardian goes and starts brainiacking cities from all over the known universe and putting them on Oa. And then he grabs John Stewart and says, "Guess what? You're in charge. Make it work." And John Stewart makes it work like nobody would have thought. And it's just a terrific series. It ended far too soon, but then again, it came to a decent ending, so I can't complain. That, and I might be I might be a little bit heretical here, but I thought that the Sinestro Corps ongoing series was one of the best Green Lantern series ever done.
Okay. I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you want to add anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay. And Chris?
Well, I was going to say Mosaic too, but I'll at the risk of stealing your thunder, because I know you said we were going to get to it later, the original Green Lantern, Green Arrow series. I missed that. I came along to comics just after that had ended. And I was a small child. I didn't have a large budget for comics. I couldn't afford the back issues. That was just, the holy grail for me. I knew about them. I was eager to read them. There were no reprints or trades or anything back then. And I befriended these comic book dealers at the Nashville flea market who would let me watch their booth for them while they went to eat lunch. And in return for doing that, they would let me read their copies if I promised to be very careful with them and not lessen the condition or the value. And that was how I was originally exposed to those. I just love those, the Denny O'Neil stories, the Neil Adams art. And I've always thought Neil Adams looks best when he's inked by Giordano. And, those stories, they're just, just marvelous. They hold up well today, where they're very easy to find because they've been reprinted probably in at least a dozen different ways.
Yeah, I read a friend's copies. By the time I was introduced to it, they were already, you couldn't find them. Fraser, what about you?
I, unsurprisingly, Silver Age up to the point where Hal leaves Coast City and goes on the road. In the 80s, Len Wein took over the book. Hal quits. John Stewart becomes Earth's Green Lantern. This eventually leads into Steve Englehart's series, which brings back Guy Gardner, deals with the Crisis on Infinite Earths. We get the 7-person Green Lantern Corps sitting on Earth, and that was a terrific run. And then Gerard Jones in the 90s, his run was uneven, but I enjoyed it when it was, and he does a good job simply because Hal and Carol have had so many ups and downs and freakish experiences and breakups and get-backs together over the years, as so many couples have. And he seemed to deal with the fact, yes, they're still together, sort of, but it's really been a train wreck if you look at it. And that, I think, was a good way to approach it. So any of those three.
Yeah, for me, it's the Adams O'Neil series. Just because I think that was the first time, it's the first time I really liked Green Arrow, even though he was really kind of a jerk in that series. But I liked him. I mean, he was written so that even though he was a bit of a loudmouth, understood where he was coming from, and I could sympathize with where he was coming from, but I could also sympathize with where Hal was coming from. And that takes good writing, to take two characters who have diametrically opposed views at times and make the reader sympathize with both of them. And so that was my first real exposure to a more in-depth version of those characters. But I think there are only like 10 of those issues. It was a very short series. And so I guess maybe, I don't know. I can't believe the sales weren't good, but maybe they weren't. I don't know.
There was actually, I was reading an article about that a while back. Apparently, a lot of people got copies from the wholesalers under the cover, went to fans who had missed the issue on the spinner rack or didn't have any comics in their town and sold them. So sales were probably much better than were actually reported.
Well, you know, when I started reading comic books, I had an allowance of 25 cents a week. And North Carolina's sales tax was a penny on 25 cents. It was 4 cents on the dollar. And so, and comics were 12 cents. So I could get 2 comic books every week. And it was a hard choice sometimes.
Yes.
So I tended to glom onto Superman, Batman, and the Legion. And if they didn't have something I wanted that week, I might buy the Justice League or the Flash or an occasional Green Lantern or Wonder Woman. But those were my priorities. And I just wonder sometimes how much of our habits as readers were shaped by what our budgets were when we first discovered comic books and got into reading them.
Yeah, I was 2 comics a week, too, for a long time.
And 80-page giants for a quarter, that was like a bonanza. You know, I could usually scrape up that penny for the sales tax on the quarter and give up 1 penny left over in my pocket and give up the gum, because you could get gum for a penny. Wow, I'm old. Okay. Anybody else want to say?
Never got an 80-page giant. That annoyed me. Green Lantern never got an 80-page giant. I would have loved to have seen some old Green Lanterns from before I was around to read them, but we never did.
Or Justice Society ones back when we were kids, speaking of Alan Scott. Anybody else want to say anything about the Adams O'Neil series before we move on?
No.
I had a period back in the early 2000s where I wasn't into comics as much as I have been for most of the rest of my life, because, stuff happens. And I missed the part where Hal, apparently driven by his urge to be right, killed the Guardians, killed the Lanterns, became Parallax, and was redeemed by stopping another Legion of Superheroes villain, the Sun Eater, possibly with encouragement from Carol Ferris. Am I getting that right?
That was a very.
I don't know about Carol Ferris, but up to then, right? He was he became a villain, and he spoiler alert, folks. There was one of these, and Fraser could probably tell me what it was. One of these crises where basically Hal had decided to shut everything down and restart it the way it used to be when it was when life was good. In other words, what every comic book fan has said. Let's start over with all issue number ones. And he almost got away with it until Oliver Queen put an arrow in him. Killing his best friend, but saving the world. And he was gone for a while. And then when we had the final night, which was, the sun was being eaten and everybody was going to freeze to death. And, then Hal showed up and used his power, used all the accumulated parallax power to, saying the oath. And the last line, Green Lantern's light, then he blew himself up and reignited the earth. And everybody's putting up there's a statue of Hal Jordan, and Batman's in the background going, because he's Batman.
Oh, and then I'm really sorry, but what Batman's saying, we lost after that.
All right. And there's a big statue, and Batman's saying, it's not enough. Still hasn't redeemed you. And then, of course, we won't get into the Spectre unless you want.
I kind of wanted to go there, actually.
I did.
Okay.
So, Fraser and Chris, what did you think of that storyline?
I hated it. In the first place, that was the second time they had tried to wipe out the Green Lantern Corps, because it's better if there's only one Green Lantern, then he's special. No, then he's just like every other unique superhero. Being part of a vast organization is much more distinctive and cooler. And there were many things that didn't make sense, like Hal kills off the other Green Lanterns so he can get all their rings. The only limit on the ring is your own willpower. If he gets 50 rings, he is not going to get 50 times as much willpower, so big whoop. But it served the purpose of a nice dramatic death of Superman, bane-breaking Batman's back event, which was what they wanted, even though I didn't care for it. Since they did do it, I would and eventually, as John was alluding to, Hal comes back. Jim Corrigan, the Spectre's mortal form, has been put to rest. The Spectre is running rogue. Hal binds him and turns him into a spirit of redemption. I wish they had stuck with that and kept Kyle as Earth's main Green Lantern, then just follow from there. But DC's editor-in-chief decided only Hal Jordan can be the main Green Lantern. Only Barry Allen can be Flash. Fix everything back, so we didn't get that.
Yeah.
Chris, do you want to add anything?
I hated the idea of those comics so much that I didn't buy them and didn't read them, and I actually stopped reading DC Comics for about 10 years. I was at a Thanksgiving dinner with a mixture of East Coast comic fans and a few comic pros, and someone who worked for DC told us that storyline was coming. And I was just so appalled that I canceled my subscriptions. I thought comics had been in decline around that time. anyway, and I'd been buying and reading fewer and fewer, and that was the last straw for me. And I came back probably about 10 years later, around 2003, 2004. I went back. I have since read all of those issues, either in the trades or I've collected the back issues, but I still very much dislike that they had Hal Jordan do that, and they had almost created in DC where it's almost like it never happened. But I don't know if this still happens, but sometimes in Justice League, Batman would say, well, I still just don't trust him. Remember what happened when he was Parallax? And I would always hate that. Like, no, don't remind me of that horrible time.
I always like Jon Stewart's response to Batman making one of those mutterings. You just don't trust Hal because he's born without fear. If you can't scare people, you ain't worth crap.
My favorite quote from that whole mess is when Ganthet, or whatever his name was, who was the last Guardian, had the last ring, and he went to Earth to find somebody worthy, and he runs into Kyle Rayner. He looks at Kyle Rayner and says, well, I guess you'll have to do, and hands him the ring without an instruction manual.
I had the quote the other quote that sticks with me from the 0 Hour event where, as John was talking about, how he's trying to recreate the multiverse, but first he has to destroy everything. And when Green Arrow's, you are insane, you cannot be doing this. Ollie, it's what you always told me to do. Challenge the system, shake things up, think outside the box, you should be pleased. I didn't mean like this.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about Carol Ferris. So why don't we do that before we move on? Because it seems to me, as a sporadic Green Lantern reader, that Carol's course in the comics has been uneven. Sometimes she's prominent, sometimes she's important to Hal, sometimes she's not, sometimes she's there, sometimes she's gone, sometimes she's Star Sapphire, sometimes she's a villain. And in the most recent 12-issue maxi series, she had a brief period where she kind of helped Hal straighten out his head in an issue or two. So what do you all think of Carol as a character, and where would you like to see her go? Chris, you want to start?
Sure. Well, as I said, I liked her in the beginning, that she was head of an aircraft company, and that that was somewhat unusual. Although I think maybe that was slightly typical of the Julius Schwartz edited books in those days. Iris West was a strong character, and Jean Loring was an attorney, so that was good. I think the on again, off again romance with Hal has run its course. I really like her best as that former lover, but both parties realize that's not going to work, but they know each other really well, and that where she's almost like Hal's best friend, maybe the same way that adult Lana is to Clark. I think I like her best when she appears that way.
Okay, Fraser?
Like Christopher, I was too young to really know a lot of gender stereotypes, but Carol, even though technically she was running the business for her father while he was traveling in Europe, he hardly ever showed up, as far as I knew, until, I guess, the 1970s. She was the one in charge, and that was kind of cool. And while they did have the romance thing going, Green Lantern versus Hal Jordan, but unlike, say, Lois Superman Clark, she was never mean to Hal. She was his friend. She thought of him as hers. She just wasn't interested in him that way, and that was good. But now I am not up on the books, but I suspect I would agree with Chris. they would work better as friends than anything else right now, after so much water under the bridge.
Okay. John?
Okay, well, first of all, Fraser, in the new Green Lantern comic, it's basically what you said. I won't explain the situation, but basically they are hopefully destined to be friends. But maybe one thing that, kept Carol from seeing Hal's better qualities over Green Lantern is that Hal was an employee. And she probably felt that it would be wrong to date the help, or maybe she just didn't date the help. She served the role as potential love interest in the beginning because, except for Batman, they all had a potential love interest. But I was never impressed with her one way or the other. She was just, to me, she was just somebody. Right. It was impressive that even back then she was running a multi-million-dollar corporation successfully, and you did not see that in comics very much. Lois Lane was not the head of was not the editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet. She was a reporter. But to me, she was just someone there to move the plot along. I either liked her or disliked her, and somehow the whole Star Sapphire thing just did not make sense.
I never felt like I got a sense of Carol as a person, because she was here and then she wasn't here and then she was off doing something. And then I missed the whole Star Sapphire period, so I didn't have that to look at. But I did like that appearance of hers in that maxi series. In the last few years, with everything that's been going on in the world, time has kind of compacted for me. So I'm not sure how long ago exactly that was, but it was the second of the 12-issue maxi series that were done that she was in. And I really liked that a lot. But one thing we haven't talked about yet is movies. We touched on it a little bit. Fraser did with the Fatal Five movie, but we haven't talked about the Lanterns in other media. And just to kind of get it dealt with up front, let's talk about the live action Ryan Reynolds movie. I heard that, Fraser, so please start.
I think they had the elements there. Well, okay, the biggest problem I had when it starts out, you see Hal causing a small disaster for Ferris Aircraft. He's conducting a test, and he is so reckless he causes a great deal of trouble. And I figure that's going to be his character arc. He's born without fear. Can he learn to think and use good judgment anyway? And instead they wind up with a standard, oh my God, I'm not sure if I can do this. I'm overwhelmed. Find the hero inside. And that killed it as far as the character went. Plus, there were things about the structure of the movie. If they had held Parallax back a lot longer instead of making his presence obvious from the first, they could have had beat Hector Hammond, then, he's just the front man. Now the real fight comes. But they didn't do that. So, nice try, but nice try is charitable as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, John?
The trailer, the trailer was great. I saw the trailer, the special effects, the scenery, and I'm thinking this is going to be a good movie. And the trailer was the best part of it. I think they spent too long with the origin story. They could have, let's look at the comics origin story. His simulator takes off on its own. He finds a dying alien who gives him the ring because he's without fear. And you could have gone from that, and he could have just put the ring on and go, well, now what do I do? And the ring tells you, and the next thing you know, he's in Oa. And they could have spent a lot more time on Oa training under Sinestro, and he's the rookie. Nobody expects him to do anything but be in a supporting role. And to everybody's surprise, he's the one who saves the day. I mean, you could have made a great movie out of that, and you could have even set up the sequel with Sinestro jealous at somebody eclipsing him, basically taking off on his own, and the after credit scene could have been him on wherever required, getting a new ring. I mean, it could have been a great movie, and they just blew their chance in the first hour by, having him do weird things. And, it was very, very disappointing. And I'm looking, if what was HBO Max and is now Max continues, keeps up to his promise of doing a live action Green Lantern series, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, Chris?
I was so excited when that movie came out. It was like a dream come true. And then I was just so disappointed. Remember a lot of people saying that they thought they tried to do too much, that they tried to cram too many elements into one movie. And that was the impression that I had, that it was just too much and it didn't work. I've heard that the extended director's cut is better. I don't know if anyone has seen that or could comment on that. I actually bought the Blu-ray and have it sitting on my shelf, but I've never, as big a Green Lantern fan as I am, I've never got around to watching it yet, which I guess says something about what I thought about the movie. Someday.
Yeah, I would agree that all the best stuff was in the trailer, because I was really excited about it. And my husband and I watched it together. And to me, the story was just kind of muddy. It was kind of all over the place, and maybe as a result of too much being crammed into it. But we were about 35, 40 minutes into it. And I turned to my husband and went, "Do you care yet?" And he said, "No, do you?" And I went, "No." And he said, this seems like it was written by a committee. And sure enough, when the credits rolled, it was written by a committee. Or at least there were so many cooks stirring the broth that they would have qualified as a committee. And, I thought Ryan Reynolds was fine. I thought he did a good job with what he had to work with. Clearly, Deadpool is going to be more lucrative for him. But I would like to see a live action Hal Jordan movie, and special effects have come so far. Because when that movie was made, I read an article that the suit was CGI. Every time he became Green Lantern, the suit was CGI. And my husband and I were like, well, they should have spent that money on writers and done a regular suit and change clothes. But now, like so much in Endgame is CGI with the costumes and the movements, that's come so far that it seems like it would be really possible to do a lot of the non-human Green Lanterns or Yellow Lanterns or whatever. I mean, I really hope if they do a movie, we don't get the rainbow, but I have a feeling we might. So I'd like to see that. And HBO Max, I would like to see it, but I look at Titans and I think it could have been a really good show. And it had flashes of brilliance, and so I look at that and I think, we'll see about anything else live action superhero they want to do, unless they pick up Superman and Lois, if the CW is so crass as to cancel it. Anyway, so let's talk about, we got about 5-10 minutes left. So let's talk about any other movies or TV shows that you all saw that you want to recommend.
You go ahead.
For the life of me, I can't remember the title, but it is DC's latest animated Green Lantern movie, and it stars Jon Stewart, and it is just a wonderful movie. And again, just look. I don't remember the title, but just look for the latest animated Green Lantern movie. And I said it's a Jon Stewart movie, and it does not disappoint.
Okay, Chris.
Actually, what I thought of when you were talking about other media was I think there were 3 or 4 Green Lantern shorts that were made by Filmation in the 1960s. And that was actually my first exposure to Green Lantern when I was a toddler, watching those. And I can still remember when they showed the Guardians, and I was just amazed. And I really think that that's when I became fascinated with Green Lantern, and I forgot about it. And then I think that's why I was drawn to him so much when I discovered him again in comics, was the impression that those Filmation shorts had made on me.
Yeah. Fraser?
Cartoon Channel did a 2-season animated Green Lantern series. Hal's off in space. I think he's with Kilowog. They do have the rainbow core around them, but it was great fun, and I thought they did a good job.
Okay. Well, we're actually coming up on time, so let's do our final roundup. Tell people where they can find information about you, or Chris, if you want to recruit to a Fanish cause, feel free. Or John and Fraser, if you want to do that too, that's fine. So tell the people where they can find you, and we'll close it out. Fraser?
Hi, I'm Fraser Sherman. You can find my book. I'm F-R-A...
Not showing.
Not showing.
Fraser Sherman, strange spelling. And you can find me at frasersherman.com, Fraser Sherman. And all my books are listed there on some of the pages. You can also find them on Amazon and most other retailers. And my most recent books were Questionable Minds, which is a steampunk Victorian psionics novel, and Aliens Are Here, which deals with aliens on Earth in films and TV. Those both came out last year.
John?
Okay, you can find me on Facebook. I have, if you search Amazon, look for John L. French, and please put a title of one of my books in there, because otherwise you will get French literature, or French language books. My newest book is The Wages of Sin. That's spelled S-Y-N. It is about a unlicensed private eye in a place called Harbor City. It's dark, it's gritty, and his back booth in the shadows, it serves as a confessional, but there's no absolution, only penance.
Okay. Chris?
I'm Chris Cavett. I'm not an author, which seems to be a rarity on these panels, but I am the central mailer of an old-fashioned APA, an amateur press alliance devoted to the Legion of Superheroes called Interlac. If you're interested in finding out more or possibly joining, you can find our Facebook group, which is imaginatively named Interlac, the Legion of Superheroes APA Facebook group.
Okay. And you can usually find me in the Comics Lair. My website is nancynorthcott.com. I'm most active on social media on Twitter, which is probably not healthy, but it's a habit, and I'm at Nancy Northcott there. My latest release is Historical Fantasy, the concluding volume of the Boar King's Honor trilogy. It's set in 1940, opens with the Dunkirk evacuation, and ends that fall during the early days of the Blitz. And it's about wizards trying to defend England against a possible Nazi invasion. So thank you to the panelists for joining this discussion. Thank you to everyone who's watching. And thank you to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information about them, you can visit heroesonline.com. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.